Mrs. Lilly is Silly, Chapter 3. How to Grab Somebody's Eyeballs. Okay, Mr. Granite said, after Mrs. Lilly was gone. Turn to page 23 in your math books. We all took out our math books and turned to page 23, but you'll never believe who walked into the doorway a few minutes later. It was Mrs. Lilly again. Mrs. Lilly, I thought you said you had to go, said Mr. Granite. To what do we owe the pleasure of your company now? That's grown-up talk for, what are you doing here? I did have to go, Mrs. Lilly replied, and I went, and now I'm back. I'm glad a tree didn't fall on you, I told her. But I thought you were going to come back another day, said Mr. Granite. We're starting our math lesson now. Math, huh? Miss Lilly said. Well, if we print up a newspaper with 10 pages in it, and there are 5 articles on each page, how many articles can we fit in the newspaper? Some kids raised their hands. Mrs. Lilly called on Little Miss I Know Everything, of course. 50, said Andrea, because 5 tens make 50. Correct, said Miss Lilly. See, we just did a math lesson. Now let's write some of those articles for our newspaper. Yay, we all shouted. I give up, said Mr. Granite. If you need me, I'll be in the teacher's lounge. He went to the teacher's lounge, which is a secret room where the teachers go have hot tub parties. Mrs. Lilly took off her trench coat, and we all gathered around her on the floor. What shall we write about? Asked Emily. Write about what you know, said Miss Lilly. You know a lot about your school. How about we make a school newspaper? We can call it the Elementary Century. You can all write articles for it. Yay, everybody yelled. Little Miss Annoying was all excited, and she was waving her hand like it was on fire. I already wrote something at home, Andrea announced, pulling some papers out of her desk. Maybe we can use it in our newspaper. Ugh, could she possibly be more boring? Only Andrea would write an article for a newspaper before she even knew we were going to make a newspaper. She held up her dumb article so we could all see it. The first page said, I Love Elementary School, by Brenda Myers. Who's Brenda Myers? Asked Alexa. That's my pen name, said Andrea. You name your pens, I said. That's weird. Andrea rolled her eyes, and then she read her article out loud. It was all about how our school was built in 1961, and it was named after a teacher named Elementary. Then it went on to talk about a bunch of other really boring stuff, like the history of the school. I thought I was going to die from boredom. When the torture was over, Andrea looked up at Mrs. Lilly and waited for her to say how wonderful that dumb article was. What a brown-noser. But that's when the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. Mrs. Lilly dropped Andrea's article into the garbage can. That was terrible, she said. Oh, snap, said Ryan. Well, Andrea looked like she was going to explode. I don't think a grown-up ever said anything like that to her. Ha-ha. Nana, boo-boo, and Andrea in her face. It was the greatest moment of my life. The Elementary Century needs to reach out and grab the reader's eyeballs, Mrs. Lilly told us. Ouch, I said. I don't want anyone touching my eyeballs. What I mean is that the newspaper have to compete with the internet, TV, and video games, Mrs. Lilly told us. Our newspaper has to have exciting stories. I thought your article was wonderful, Andrea, whispered Emily, who loves everything Andrea does. But our school is really boring, said Michael. I don't think we can make an exciting newspaper that will grab people's eyeballs. Nothing interesting ever happens here, said Ryan. Yeah, said Neil the nude kid. This school is boring. We don't have any good stories to tell. Sure you do, Mrs. Lilly said. You've just got to dig for them. At that very moment, Mr. Klutz came into the classroom. He's our principal, and he has no hair at all. I mean, none. His head is like a light bulb. Not one of those curly light bulbs. That would be weird. We're making a newspaper, all about the school, said Mrs. Lilly. Can we interview you, Mr. Klutz? Certainly, he replied. A school newspaper is a great idea. What would you like to know about me? I thought Mrs. Lilly was going to ask Mr. Klutz what it was like to be principal and boring stuff like that, but she didn't. Tell us, Klutz, said Miss Lilly, when did you lose your hair? Everybody gasped. Nobody had ever asked Mr. Klutz about his hair before. That's personal, said Andrea. We shouldn't ask people personal questions like that. Oh, I don't mind, Mr. Klutz said. Let's see. I remember my wedding pictures. I had a full head of hair when I first got married. My hair started falling out about the time my wife and I got divorced, and by the time I got married again, I was totally bald. Mr. Klutz told us some more stuff about the good old days when he had hair, and then he said he had to go. Do you have to go? I asked, or do you have to go? I have to go, he said. Mr. Klutz left, and Mrs. Lilly went over to the whiteboard. So we're going to write an article about Mr. Klutz's hair? Asked Alexa. No, I have another idea, said Miss Lilly. Let me show you how to handle this interview. It's a great human interest story. I can see the headline now. And then she wrote this on the whiteboard with big letters. Mr. Klutz has 2 wives.